Hi, my name is David. This is the first milestone for my main project, which is an audio synthesizer. For this milestone, I was able to get the Arduino to read voltage based on the potentiometers and then detect if a button is pressed or not pressed using the Arduino code. The main part of my setup is the Arduino, which has an AVR microcontroller which contains all the code to control a circuit, and also the pins in which I can hook up components of the circuit. In the Arduino, there are two different kinds of pins, the analog pins over here and the digital pins. And I use both pins as inputs. The difference between the pins is that the analog pins read the amount of voltage going through them, give a pretty much exact value of the voltage from 0 to 5 volts. And the digital pins also read voltage, but can be read in two different states, a high logic state or a low logic state. The difference between them is I use the analog pins to read the potentiometers to get an exact value of where I set the potentiometer based on the resistance, and the high and low is helpful for testing if the button is pressed or not pressed. To hook up all the components, I used a breadboard so I can connect wires to the breadboard and then to the components more easily. And then the potentiometers are resistors that can be set to a certain amount of resistance using a slider or a knob. And then within these resistors, the voltage is split, so when the voltage is going through the circuit, that voltage can be split and then read by an input on the Arduino. And then over here I have a button which I hooked up to one of the digital inputs, so when I press it, the Arduino reads that a button is the pin reads when basically changes state when the button is pressed. And for the first 0 through 12 digital inputs, all I would have had to do is just connect one end of the pin to one end of the button and then just ground the other end, because that would create a circuit, because these pins have built-in pull-up resistors which set their logic state to high, and then when the button's pressed it changes that to low. But with pin 13 here, I want to test if that worked, because pin 13 is connected to an LED, which makes the pull-up resistors not as functional as the other ones. So instead I use a pull-down resistor, right, this 4.7 kilo ohm resistor, which instead, when I hook that up, and also a 5 volts to the button, that keeps the logic state of that pin at low, and then when I press the button it increases it to high, so I can still determine if the button's pressed or not pressed. So this is the serial monitor for my Arduino, and then as I change the resistance on one of the potentiometers, it reads the voltage going through that potentiometer and thus going through the pin on the Arduino. That's the same for the rotary one. And then for the button, whenever I press the button, I test whenever the state of the button changes, and I set that to activate it, and then when I press the button again, it deactivates that. And then my next milestone will be putting together the enclosure of my synthesizer and soldering all the components to the Arduino and making sure that circuit works.